We now want to bring in former Secretary of Education and Chancellor of the State University of New York, John King Jr. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So let me just get your reaction to this announcement by President Trump, again signing that executive order aimed at beginning the process of dismantling the Department of Education. What do you think the biggest impact will be?
Well, as you point out, he actually can't unilaterally dismantle the education department. He can only do that with Congress. And I think what you're going to see is bipartisan support in Congress for maintaining the vital functions of the department, directing resources to vulnerable students, low-income students, students with disabilities, funding the Pell Grant program and the student loan program that makes it possible for Americans to access higher education, and civil rights enforcement, which has been the historical role of the department, critical role ensuring that states and districts do right by all of their students. It's a protection against discrimination based on race or disability or gender.
Let me follow up with you on that point, because Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, said, look, the president was vowing that the critical functions of the department will be retained. Is that possible if you move to start the process of dismantling the Department of Education?
Simply put, no. I mean, it's a disingenuous claim. And we already saw that playing out in this past week. They announced layoffs of a significant number of employees. They've laid off more than 1,300 people, including people who work on the free application for federal student aid, the doorway, if you will, into the federal student loan program. That FAFSA broke last week. And the reason that happened is because there wasn't the right team in place to keep it going. And then when it broke, it took them longer than it should have to fix, because they reached out to people who would ordinarily fix it, and they weren't there anymore because they were laid off. So it's already proving false that you can preserve the functions of the department without the people who work at the department.
You heard the president there say that the discretionary budget had, quote, exploded by 600%. It's my understanding the Department of Education accounts for about 4% of the federal budget, very small amount. Can you give us your sense? Is that accurate, that the discretionary budget has, quote unquote, exploded by 600%? Has it become too expensive?
I'm not exactly sure what the president was referring to there. What is clear is a program like the Pell Grant program, it has grown over time as the cost of higher education has increased. But the Pell Grant program is making it possible for low-income and middle-income Americans to access college. That's good for the country, it's good for the economy, it's good for our national security. The program for students with disabilities, yes, it's grown over time as we have gotten better as a country at meeting the needs of students with disabilities. We want students to get the speech-language therapy that they need, to get the supports they need if they're on the autism spectrum and they need help in order to access quality education. These are investments that are about the long-term health of the country.
So talk to parents, because I have to tell you, the conversations that I have with parents are expressing concerns about the students that you are talking about, students with special needs, a wide range of special needs. Do you think there is a way to start to cut back on this agency and also make sure that those functions for students with special needs remain intact?
I think the reality is no. I mean, look, are there ways to make the activities of the department more efficient? Sure. But one of the things they did last week was to lay off the people who work for the Office for Civil Rights. Well, that's where you go if you have a complaint because your child isn't getting the services they're entitled to. Last year, that office got more than 20,000 complaints. Who will handle those complaints without the people at the department whose job it is to protect those students?
You know, the Trump administration has said, and you just heard the president reiterate, that this is about restoring education to the states. As I pointed out, there are a range of functions that the state is already in charge of. When you hear that, what does that mean to you?
You know, it's a rhetorical move. The reality is most decision-making about education happens at the state and local level. But there is a crucial federal role that goes back to the Civil Rights Movement, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, the Higher Education Act of 1965. These laws were put in place because we needed the federal government to step in to make sure that students weren't discriminated against. And that role continues. We need the federal government to say to a state, you can't ignore the needs of your English learners. To say to a district, you can't leave Black students or Latino students out of access to advanced placement classes or extracurricular activities at your school. That civil rights role has to be protected. And in the end, I think there will be bipartisan support in Congress for protecting that role.
You know, Secretary King, what is also true is that students' test scores hit an all-time low last year. Why do you think that is, and what do you think should be done to improve that?
Look, we are still struggling with the impact of COVID. So many students' lives were disrupted in dramatic ways by the COVID crisis. Our performance as a country is below where it was before COVID. We ought to be having a conversation about what we do about that. We know, for example, that intensive tutoring can help students make very rapid progress. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the dismantling of the department. We haven't heard any ideas from the Trump administration about how we actually improve education in this country. That's the conversation we desperately need to have.
Secretary King, we really appreciate your perspective today. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.